Hi all, welcome to the March 2023 astrology. I'm in beautiful New Zealand right now. I'm looking at this epic mountain, so I'm gonna try to keep this brief so I can go hike. But I want to quickly, before I get into March, talk about February, just because we had some major global events take place, really, and particularly the one that comes to mind was what I believe to be a result of the full moon, the February 5th full moon eclipse trigger that occurred squaring the eclipse point from the November eclipse and also square to Uranus, which represents disruption, shocking events, etc. And we saw just a day later, that next day on the 6th, the Turkey earthquake, which was really devastating. And I mean, that area, I believe, is still getting earthquakes. And so, as I mentioned last month, we've got two malefics in the air signs, and it can feel really destabilizing, especially with these like crazy earth changes, the Uranus and Taurus earth changes. It can have us in a kind of fight or flight response. Like I almost didn't even come to New Zealand because of the news of cyclones and the worst weather in 100 years hitting New Zealand. And I tried to cancel my trip, and then everyone was like, no, where you're going is not affected. So it's just to keep in mind that like we want to have compassion for these events and help in ways that we can. It's also important to stay grounded in the present moment of what's happening for you right now, because with widespread news and technology, we're so privy to hearing about catastrophes and very rattling events that it can kind of take us off our center if we let it, right? So something to keep in mind is just that keeping up with the grounding, as I was talking about last month, where you go outside and put your feet on the earth and just stay really connected to what's in front of you at any given time, like the people, the relationships, the experiences that you're having. It's so easy to get like transported into another place. And I'm definitely not advocating ignorance or avoidance of, the facts. But I think it's important to not get like let it affect our centering. So that being said, we've got all the planets direct throughout the month. Mercury is direct all month, but I want to make one note that it's entering into Pisces, which is considered its detriment. And it's also going to be combust, which means it's in a really close degree to the sun. And it's almost blinded by the sun. And so in traditional astrology, they say that this weakens a planet. And so Mercury in Pisces and combust can kind of weaken its effects. Mercury in Pisces really excels at creative expression, but struggles to be clear. People with this placement, I know natally, are very poetic, but they might not always know what they're saying until the words are kind of coming out of their mouth, and the communication can be confusing. So it's just something to keep in mind throughout Mercury's transition through this sign. We're gonna go over the days of intensity. So I'm gonna give a disclaimer on my on my days of intensity and days of harmony. So I put these out here, and I just wanted to share a little anecdote that like I make these transit reports and then life happens, and I'll like find myself, when I first got here, I had a really challenging day. Like a lot of things were going wrong. I had to go to like three different places to rent a car. I finally rented a car and I crashed into something, and the rear view mirror gets like shattered, but the car was fine. And I wasn't used to driving so on the opposite side of the road, so I was like way too far over, and I just like swiped something. And then later, I had a really interesting interaction with someone that they kind of exploded at me. And I was thinking to myself, is today a day of intensity? So I pull up my app and I look at the transits, and I noticed it was a Moon Square Pluto day. And I just thought, oh, that's interesting, and I just kind of was like, That's interesting. Like we can't we can't prevent these days from happening, but if you have like big things that you want to accomplish, maybe don't plan it on one of these days. But there's an interesting story about the Dalai Lama. Like he would go to an astrologer and ask about all the worst transits, and then pick those days to travel, or do something important, just to prove perhaps to himself that he could stay grounded in those really challenging times too. So it's interesting to observe, but obviously, we live our lives and we're gonna deal with stuff. But for me, I guess knowing that we're in a day of intensity just gives me a little more detachment and allows me to not get so swept up in the chaos or drama, and kind of just laugh at it a little bit, or just observe it and know that, it'll pass. So the days of intensity for March are March 2nd, March 9th, March 13th, the 16th, and the 17th, the 20th, the 23rd, and the 24th. So I just want to highlight the second. This is Moon opposite Pluto, and Mercury in its detriment conjunct Saturn. So I feel like this is kind of a signature for potential miscommunication, misunderstanding, or arguments. On the 16th and 17th, I want to note that one too, because that's a pretty marked day of intensity, because we have the moon in its detriment in Capricorn, squaring Venus and Jupiter in Aries, and the moon is also conjoining Pluto. So there's a lot of challenging aspects on the 16th, and it kind of bleeds into the 17th as well. And the last one I want to kind of highlight is the 24th. The moon is in Taurus, conjunct Uranus. It's also conjunct Venus, so that kind of gives it a little bit more interest to me. And we have the moon squaring Pluto. So it's a moon square Pluto day, but there's a lot of kind of excitement happening too. So it could be a day of intensity that's, almost fun. All right, so days of harmony. These can be really good for planning important events in your life. So on the first, we've got Venus conjunct Jupiter in Aries, and we have the Cancer moon, which is the moon in its own domicile, trining the sun and Neptune. So I feel like this is a really creative day, because there's the inspiration from Venus and Jupiter in Aries, and then the ability to materialize it into something tangible with the moon in Cancer trining Neptune and the sun. On the 14th, we've got the moon trine Jupiter. Those can feel just like very optimistic and, abundant days. On the 15th, the sun is conjunct Mercury and Neptune. And Mercury and Neptune to me is a very musical kind of planetary combination. And so I feel like this would be a really nice day for playing music, going to a show, hosting a show, etc. On the 18th, we've got the Aquarius moon, which I always find to be a very social moon, trining Mars and sextiling Jupiter, so it's highly energized. And we also have Venus and Taurus on this day, so that increases our ability to appreciate the sensual, things of beauty, good food, good company. It's a nice social day. I think it could be a really nice day to have like a get together. On the 31st, we have the Leo moon trining the sun and Jupiter and Chiron. So a very stimulating day, and also could be very, beneficial for receiving a healing treatment or healing modality. It could be a really nice day to do your spring cleaning. Like you might feel very fired up this day and want to get your dusty corners of your house cleaned up, get rid of some things, do a spring purge. All right. So the key dates for March, as I mentioned, on the second, Mercury goes into Pisces, not its strongest placement, but a really good placement for creative, mental processing. Also could be, vivid dreams, a lot more vivid dreams coming through. So maybe pay more attention to your dreams if you don't. On the 7th, we've got the full moon in Virgo. And Saturn enters Pisces this day, which I talked about last month as being a earthquake signature. And it can also point to restrictions around water. And that's interesting in light of the fact that we just had that recent spill into the water. And so we might see this leading to restrictions around how water is used and accessed, and perhaps even limitations around shipments that take place by water. Um, we also have on March 16th Venus entering Taurus. Oh, sorry, one more thing about Venus, or sorry, Saturn and Pisces. Saturn and Pisces is also an addiction signature because we have the malefic sign of Saturn in Pisces. So it can represent like overdoses or overindulgence or escapism. So that's something to just be mindful of with those energies. So on the 16th, we've got Venus in Taurus, which is all about sensual enjoyment and appreciation. Venus is in its domicile in Taurus. That's the planet that rules Taurus. So when we have a planet in its own domicile, it's strengthened. So this can feel fruitful on like an economic or resource level. And I think it's a really good time to plant your garden, perhaps with the new moon, sowing your seeds at the Aries new moon or waiting, for the following new moon. But Venus and Taurus heightens, I think, our appreciation of anything sensory. On the 18th, we've got Mercury in Aries. I'm really parched. Hold on. So Mercury in Aries, as I mentioned, I think this is very inspirational because Aries is such an instinctive sign. And so it could really bring a lot of new ideas. And it can also perhaps be combative dialogue or debate, right? Because Mercury in Aries is like very to the point. And Mercury in Aries is also like, because Aries wants to distinguish itself as like a separate I am, that Mercury in Aries can sometimes be like, in order to distinguish oneself, one feels like they need to be opposed to something else, right? And so that can perhaps manifest in more combative dialogue. On the 20th, we have the spring equinox. The 21st is the new moon in Aries, and I think it's squaring Mars. I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but it's kind of an intense new moon. On the 24th, we've got Pluto entering Aquarius. So I'm going to talk about this at length after this slide, but that's a huge transit. So once in every 20, well, this particular one last happened a really long time ago, but Pluto changes signs every 20 years. So, excuse me, when it changes into a new sign, it's like a really big deal. On the 25th, we have Mars entering Cancer. So Mars in Cancer is considered, Mars is in its detriment in Cancer because it's the vital force, the will, the drive, the determination in this like very nurturing and feeling sign of Cancer. So sometimes that can manifest as like volatile emotions, right? But also, I want to say that it can weaken, right? It can have this kind of weakening effect on the vital force because Mars does represent stamina. And so I think it's interesting because since we're at the spring equinox point in Ayurveda, they consider spring to be like a kapha season. And so I think it's interesting with Mars and Cancer during this kapha season, like we need to pay extra attention to our lymph and circulation. That can be really helpful. So things like dry brushing, where you literally take like a bristle brush and you go towards your heart, always towards your heart, and it stimulates your lymph. Obviously, exercise is a really simple way. Things like a sauna could be really nice because it being this kind of like season where we're trying to rid accumulation, I would say those practices can really support your body because spring can sometimes be where we're prone to our immune system not being quite as strong. Whenever we have seasonal changeover, it kind of weakens our immune system. And it can also feel um, yeah, just like a lot of energy, right? So it's a big shift to go from winter to spring. And so just be gentle on your bodies, go lighter in your diet potentially if that's right for you. Meaning not so many oily or heavy things, but more greens, more pungent, bitter foods, things that allow your body to just like rid any excess accumulation or fluid. All right, so let's get into this Pluto in Aquarius. This is a really big deal, and we're getting kind of like a highlight of it in March until early June. It'll be there. But the last time we had Pluto in Aquarius was 1778 to 1798. So, as I mentioned, Pluto stays in a sign for 20 years. And Pluto is a very transpersonal collective planet that has a lot to do with our the kind of structures of our society. And so when it changes into a sign, that's a very big deal. And in Aquarius, it's the fixed air sign of the water bearer. So Aquarius kind of has this dual, I think of it as like a dual elemental of water and air because it's the water bearer. But it's really has a lot to do with society, the way society is structured, innovations and technology, and ideas, right? Because fixed air represents the intellect and philosophies. And so when Pluto was last in this sign, we saw the Revolutionary War. So people wanting to like break free and create their own new governments. We saw the division of political systems, the development of conservatism and liberalism. And we also saw the invention of the steam engine, which brought about one of the things that brought about the Industrial Revolution, where machines could then create uh, more production, right? And machines were in a sense replacing humans. Well, really, humans were working side by side with the machines, but they were outperforming, let's say, what like a human could have, sewn. They were having now industrial level sewing and factories and ways of shipping goods. So this totally transformed the economy. And there were negatives and positives of that, right? So on the one hand, people were more employed, and the other hand, some of these technologies that were developed, they didn't really know like the dangers of them, and a lot of people died, and there was, a lot of dark things happening too, where children were being employed to work some of these places, and the conditions weren't that great. So when Pluto's in Aquarius, it's almost like there's an emphasis on what's good for humanity that maybe we forget about the individual people that make that up. There's also, because Aquarius is fixed air, there can be kind of like a rigidness in thought. And it was interesting because when we last had this placement, it coincided with the Enlightenment or the Age of Reason, which brought about a lot of beautiful ideas, but also rejected in a way, in some ways, faith or the idea of the mystic, in favor of what could be proven by reason or logic or observed. And so it's interesting because we're seeing mirrors of a lot of these themes now. And with astrology, like nothing is ever exactly the same, meaning when Pluto was last in Aquarius, we had all these other planets in different signs. So it was a completely unique to that period. But we study this to kind of gauge what kind of themes that might be mirrored in this new time that we're in. But it is still a different time. Like we have all these other planets in novel signs as well. So we need to take that into consideration. But yeah, I think the Age of Enlightenment is fascinating because there was such an emphasis on logic, and we saw the development of deism, which is the idea that it didn't reject God. It basically said like, okay, there could be a creator, right? We're not rejecting religion altogether, but the belief was that God didn't interfere with the matters of the earth. Kind of like there was a divine creator, but he's not like having his hand in things. So the whole idea of prayer or connecting to that source is kind of irrelevant. And I personally find that view challenging. I think there's space for both. And perhaps in the time that we're in now, we're trying to maybe create this space for both. So not every thinker during this age of reason jumped on that bandwagon. I mean, there were some more mystical leaning thinkers. I think Rousseau was one of them that left room for the kind of unknowable. Because my theory is when you make science like this infallible thing, then in a way, science has become your religion because you have to accept that science has its limitation and its faults and doesn't explain everything. You know what I mean? So let's go into our current Pluto in Aquarius. So we have it happening March 23rd. It enters into Aquarius until June 11th. So it's this kind of like prologue. What's the word? Prelogue. It's like a little like intro to Pluto and Aquarius, and then it will retrograde back into Capricorn because there's some systems it probably still needs to bring down. Because Pluto and Capricorn is all about kind of destroying the structures that aren't working. So then it will re-enter Aquarius on January 2024. And so what might we see? So these are just some ideas that I had. I think we'll see another wave of like water power, hydropower. And we're already seeing these inventions like using tidal forces to create electricity. I think they had something even in like Manhattan where they've been experimenting with this, where it's a sustainable source of electricity that just uses the waves and converts that into energy with a generator and then can power homes, which is really incredible. So I think we'll see more inventions like that. New political parties emerging. I think there's like kind of a risk of nationalism when Pluto's in Aquarius or over identification with the group, but we might see new ideas emerging. When Pluto's last in Aquarius, we saw like the beginning of the ideas of communism. So we might see new philosophies regarding how government should work. We're also seeing like drone weaponry, AI, right? AI created art, AI entering really all facets of society. So we're gonna have like our own new AI revolution that we're seeing robots. Like this is a picture I took, or I didn't take this, sorry, but I was in the San Jose airport and I found this picture online of what I saw there. Basically, it's like a barista robot. So the idea of like, wow, like so many people are like work as baristas. And then if these things get churned out, robots will replace them. And I mean, this is not a new idea. Like we've been thinking about these things for a while, but yeah, how many careers are going to be replaced by robots and what kind of, does that create civil unrest or is that a positive thing? It just changes perhaps the types of jobs people do. But yeah, it brings a lot of questions. And then we also see this last photo is like an automated truck. So it's a truck that is self-driving. And I don't know, like for some reason that scares me, but it's just like a scary image because there's no windows and person inside and it's weird. But yeah, these are just some ideas about Pluto entering into Aquarius. So a whole new wave of inventions and innovations that change the way society functions. All right, so I'm at 25 minutes. All right, that's pretty much my recap of March. I went way over what I planned to do, but thanks for tuning in, guys. If you guys have any thoughts or ideas that you want to share, comment below, and I hope you have a beautiful month.